Okay, let's get into it. Today we are doing a deep dive into just one of the most glittering but ultimately tragic figures in all of American literature, Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald.
That's right. He was the voice, really the definitive voice of the Roaring Twenties.
A man who absolutely lived the high life he wrote about, only to watch it all crumble. His own spectacular personal and professional decline happening in real time.
And that arc, that glittering rise, the brutal fall, and then this posthumous canonization, that's what makes Fitzgerald such a perpetually fascinating figure for you to study.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Exactly, to really pull apart and extract the most important insights about his dual identity.
And that identity is just split right down the middle, isn't it?
Completely.
On one hand, he's the ultimate chronicler of the Jazz Age. He basically defined that entire, morally permissive era for the rest of the country.
Mhm.
But on the other side, he was a really serious modernist writer who just failed. Commercially, financially, he failed during his lifetime, dying believing his life and his work were, in his eyes, total failures.
It's the American myth of success and failure just distilled into one man.
Yeah.
And when you look at the sheer output, it's just extraordinary, especially for a relatively short life.
It's a huge body of work.
Huge. He published 4 completed novels, one tragically unfinished one, The Last Tycoon, 4 story collections, and a staggering 164 short stories.
Wow.
That volume alone, it tells you about an immense drive, but also, as we're going to see, it points to a tremendous, almost crippling financial necessity.
I think that's the thing that's so fascinating here, and what we really need to wrestle with right away is that central paradox of his career.
Okay.
Fitzgerald achieved this, transient success. He was a celebrity author in the 1920s. He made a fortune, but he absolutely did not get the critical or financial acclaim that was really commensurate with his talent, not until decades after he died in 1940.
That reversal of fortune is almost unprecedented in American literature. He died poor, thinking he was irrelevant, and yet now he is, without question, regarded as one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century.
Required reading. His books are taught all over the world.
Globally, yeah.
And he didn't just write about the Jazz Age. He named it.
He literally named it. He popularized the term in his short story collection, Tales of the Jazz Age. So he was both the product and the narrator of that specific chaotic time.
Which makes me wonder, though, was the Jazz Age truly this era of disillusionment, or was it maybe just the invention of a few high-profile writers like Fitzgerald, who then, profited from romanticizing their own bad behavior?
That's a critical question.
Yeah.
And it speaks directly to the inherent contradiction in his personality and his writing style.
Right.
His friend, the great literary critic Edmund Wilson, he gave one of the best syntheses of Fitzgerald's unique voice.
Okay, what did he say?
Wilson really captured this war between the man and his material. He noted that Fitzgerald was romantic, but also cynical. He was bitter, yet ecstatic. Astringent, but also incredibly lyrical.
That sounds like Wilson was maybe being a little generous. I mean, overlooking Fitzgerald's self-destructive vanity by just calling it an Irish gift?
Well, perhaps. But Wilson went on to praise his ability to turn language into something, and this is the quote, iridescent and surprising.
Iridescent and surprising. I like that.
It implies a writer who had this innate, almost magical ability with words, yet was constantly dragging himself through the mud of his own anxieties and his own excesses.
Yeah, you can see why his writing always feels so urgent and just deeply conflicted.
It's incredible that this lyrical voice, so capable of such a clear-eyed social critique, came from someone so cynical and, frankly, so self-absorbed.
So let's trace that cynicism back. Let's go to the source. His childhood. Fitzgerald was the permanent outsider, and that started very early.
You have to begin there. With his relatively humble beginnings in St. Paul, Minnesota, he was born into a middle-class Catholic family in 1896.
And he was named after his famous distant cousin, Francis Scott Key.
The man who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. So you have this profound connection to the national identity baked right into his name. But the family's financial reality was much less grand.
The family history here is like a microcosm of the American promise and its failure, which became his life's theme.
It really is. His mother, Mary McQuillan Fitzgerald, came from an Irish immigrant family that got rich as wholesale grocers, so she has some security.
But his father, Edward, he ran a wicker furniture business that failed just a year after Scott was born.
That failure's key. It forced the family to move to Buffalo, New York, and Edward worked for Procter & Gamble until he was fired in 1908.
Fired?
Fired. And the records we have show his father really struggled with destitution and alcoholism after that.
So you've got young Scott growing up with this deep internal conflict. His mother's inheritance lets them keep up this comfortable middle-class lifestyle. He has the appearance of wealth, access to good schools.
Right, the veneer.
But just beneath that veneer is the constant gnawing instability of his father's failure. He was always striving to meet the standard of the genuinely wealthy people around him, but he never had the old money or the true status to compete. That was his formative anxiety.
He later admitted this was the absolute key to his sensibility. He knew what wealth looked like, he could mimic it perfectly, but he understood the desperation of not belonging.
Which made him the perfect observer of the wealthy.
The perfect observer.
Yeah.
Because he envied and resented them in equal measure.
And this is where his family history gets really interesting. There's this footnote that sounds like something he would have made up for a story.
It really does.
Yeah.
His father's first cousin, twice removed, was Mary Surratt,
who was hanged in 1865 for conspiring to assassinate Abraham Lincoln.
It's an incredibly potent, deep American lineage. It encapsulates both national triumph and national tragedy.
You have the guy who wrote the national anthem on one side.
And on the other, a figure associated with the profound, irreparable break of the Civil War and the assassination of its great leader. This duality, the soaring ideal of America and its dark, hidden failures, it feels like it subconsciously predisposed Fitzgerald to his central themes.
The decay hidden beneath glittering surfaces.
Exactly.
It suggests the seeds of that cynicism were there right from the beginning. The real literary seed, though, that got planted when he attended the Newman School in New Jersey.
Yes, that's where he met Father Sigourney Fay. He became a crucial early mentor. Fay was this accomplished, well-read figure who saw Scott's talent very early on and really encouraged his literary ambitions.
And that encouragement carries him right into Princeton University,
where he enrolled as one of the only Catholics in the student body, which, again, instantly cemented his status as an outsider looking in.
But he thrived there, intellectually. He jumped right into the campus literary scene, writing for the Princeton Triangle Club, the Princeton Tiger, the Nassau.
And this is where he forges the relationships that will define his entire professional life. He befriends two key people, John Peel Bishop, who became an important modernist poet, and the great literary critic, Edmund Wilson.
Wilson, who would later be the one to champion him after his death.
But the defining personal drama, the one that really launched the rocket of his career, that began during Christmas break of his sophomore year.
Right. He was 18. He meets Ginevra King,
a 16-year-old Chicago debutante. She was the original muse, the lightning strike. She represented everything he desired and everything he could not have.
And this is where that crucial class barrier narrative just slams right into his life.
It really does.
Yeah.
Ginevra was fabulously wealthy, upper class, privileged, the ultimate golden girl of the Midwest. Her family, especially her father, just saw Fitzgerald as a completely unsuitable social climber.
And her father's words to him, or at least the ones that have been passed down, they became this line that just haunts American literature. It's the ultimate articulation of Fitzgerald's deepest anxiety.
Poor boys shouldn't think of marrying rich girls.
It's so brutal in its simplicity, but it also perfectly crystallizes this rigid class system in America that Fitzgerald spent his entire career trying to dissect.
That phrase, whether it is spoken exactly like that or just internalized through 1,000 social slights, it became the absolute central, recurring theme of his entire body of work.
The unfairness of it all.
The unfairness. This idea that a poor young man, intelligent and ambitious, can't transcend his status purely because of a lack of generational wealth.
And the literary result is just undeniable. Ginevra, the girl who got away because of class, she becomes the model for Isabelle Bourget in This Side of Paradise.
And most famously,
Daisy Buchanan, the elusive, wealthy, and ultimately careless Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby.
The rejection was emotionally catastrophic for him. We know how profound it felt, because a suicidal Fitzgerald again enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War I.
And he was specifically hoping to die in combat. This wasn't just patriotic service.
No, this was a desperate, self-destructive reaction to the pain of social rejection.
And he was stationed at Fort Leavenworth, where he served, remarkably, under Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower.
A fascinating little historical detail. The future literary giant, just chafing under the authority of the future president and supreme Allied commander.
And he did not like him.
The sources say he intensely disliked Eisenhower, found him stiff, authoritative. So while he was waiting to be deployed, fearing he would die in Europe, he hastily wrote this massive 120,000-word manuscript.
The romantic egotist.
In just 3 months, he was desperate to publish a novel to leave some artifact of his existence before he died in battle.
Scribner's thankfully rejected it, but the editor, the great Max Perkins, was impressed. He wisely praised the writing and encouraged him to revise it.
So Fitzgerald didn't die on the Western Front, but he did meet his next great muse, who would demand a very different kind of sacrifice.
And that, of course, was Zelda Sayre.
In 1918, while he was garrisoned near Montgomery, Alabama, he met the 17-year-old Southern belle. And if Ginevra was that polished, old-money ideal, Zelda was the dazzling, reckless embodiment of the modern American spirit.
She was part of Montgomery's exclusive country club set, and her family owned the first White House of the Confederacy. So she's linked to this deep South, complicated, aristocratic past.
And just like Ginevra, Zelda initially rejected his marriage proposal. But this rejection, unlike the first one, was based purely on hard numbers.
His lack of financial prospects.
Exactly. His Catholic background was a concern for her Episcopalian family, but money was the clear primary barrier.
And this second rejection was pivotal. It drove him out of the Army to New York City and forced him to chase success, not as an artistic fulfillment, but as a financial imperative. He had to prove he could afford the life Zelda had always known.
And he struggled. Profoundly. He failed spectacularly to get a newspaper job and ended up writing advertising copy, living in this cramped single room on the West Side.
This is where we get that great little historical detail of his most famous piece of ad copy.
Created for an Iowa laundry. We keep you clean in Muscatine.
It's just a perfect illustration of the contrast between the soaring ambition of the Princeton literary star and the mundane reality of a struggling ad man.
And the volume of failure before the breakthrough is just astonishing. He was rejected over 120 times for his stories.
120 times.
And sold only one, Babes in the Woods, for a pittance of $30. He was living in relative poverty, writing about a world he desperately wanted to join but just couldn't afford.
The difficulty of breaking in, despite his obvious talent, it really speaks to the sheer tenacity that you need to succeed.
And the financial pressure? It finally led to the second breaking point. Zelda finally broke off the engagement in June of 1919.
And this rejection, coming after Ginevra, was just catastrophic. He threatened to jump from a window ledge, carried a revolver, contemplated suicide. It was total rock bottom.
So defeated and rudderless, he quits advertising, moves back to his parents' home in St. Paul, and he stakes everything on one last desperate attempt to become a successful novelist.
And this wasn't just an artistic choice. This was survival.
It was. He abstained from alcohol, from parties, living like a monk, and just aggressively revised the romantic egotist into this side of paradise.
And that desperation, it fueled the lightning strike. Published on March 26, 1920, the novel, which was basically about his Princeton years and his romances with Ginevra and Zelda, became an instant cultural sensation.
It sold 40,000 copies in the first year alone.
It cemented his reputation overnight. Critics like H.L. Mencken called it the best American novel of the year. Columnists saw it as the first realistic American college novel, something that actually captured the cynical, fast-moving spirit of the post-war youth.
And his paychecks reflected that. He went from making $30 a story to magazine rates of $1,000 almost instantly.
And this fame, this financial success, it immediately brought Zelda back.
She resumed the engagement because he could now afford the affluent lifestyle she was accustomed to.
But this is a critical point that foreshadows their entire tragedy. Fitzgerald married her even though his feelings were at an all-time low. He told a friend, "I wouldn't care if she died, but I couldn't stand to have anybody else marry her."
Wow.
It's a chilling line.
They married on April 3, 1920, and Fitzgerald later claimed neither of them still loved the other. He saw the early years of their marriage as more like a strained, very public friendship.
So the marriage was based not on love, but on financial security and social validation.
This is where the definition of the jazz age celebrity really begins. They moved into the Biltmore Hotel in New York and instantly became known for their just juvenile, outrageous behavior.
We have these wonderful, unbelievable anecdotes. Scott doing handstands in the lobby, Zelda sliding down the banisters.
Behavior that got them asked to leave.
So they moved to the Commodore Hotel and famously spent half an hour just spinning in the revolving door, completely drunk.
Dorothy Parker recalled seeing them riding on the roof of a taxi. She said they looked as though they had just stepped out of the sun. Everyone wanted to meet them. They were the living, breathing epitome of this new cultural moment.
And Fitzgerald became the flag bearer for this youth in revolt. He helped define the Jazz Age as this morally permissive era, a disillusionment with old social norms, and an obsession with self-gratification.
He described it as a race along under its own power, served by great filling stations full of money.
And that whole hedonistic lifestyle was just relentlessly fueled by alcohol.
Those gin and fruit concoctions that let them maintain that ecstatic public facade. But while it looked glamorous privately, it led to bitter quarrels, deep jealousies, and constant accusations of infidelity.
Confirming to both of them, probably, that their marriage was fundamentally doomed.
In 1921, their daughter, Frances Scotty Fitzgerald, was born. And this brings us to another famous, darkly insightful anecdote that immediately found its way into his fiction.
Right. As Zelda was coming out of the anesthesia after childbirth, she had this famous, rambling remark.
"I hope it's beautiful and a fool. A beautiful little fool."
And Fitzgerald used that line almost verbatim for Daisy Buchanan's dialogue in The Great Gatsby.
It just shows how closely he mined their turbulent, chaotic private life for his fiction right from the very start. Everything was material, even his wife's semi-conscious words after delivering their child.
Let's move now into the period that gave us his greatest work. His second novel, The Beautiful and Damned, in 1922, that propelled him even farther into the cultural elite. It sold 50,000 copies.
And this book was even more explicitly modeled on their marriage. Anthony Patch was a version of Scott, and Gloria Patch represented what he saw as Zelda's chill-mindedness and selfishness.
But the problem was the financial pressure, it didn't go away. It got worse. He tried to maintain the success with a play, The Vegetable, in 1923, but it was an unmitigated disaster.
A disaster. The audience literally walked out during the second act.
So this flop was a crucial financial pivot point for him. He's mired in crushing debt from the play's failure, and he's forced into a pattern he deeply resented.
Writing short stories just to restore his finances. This is the famous whoring of his talent.
He saw most of these commercial stories as worthless, but he had to churn them out for the high rates paid by magazines like the Saturday Evening Post.
He called it rotten stuff, but the money was necessary to pay the bills and keep Zelda happy. The one significant exception he noted was Winter Dreams, which he explicitly said was his first attempt at the Gatsby idea.
So while he was trying to make money in Great Neck, Long Island, to be near Broadway, he's exposed to this incredible extravagance of the neighboring mansions, which would, of course, define the setting of his third novel.
Critically, he encountered a real-life figure who provided the blueprint for J. Gatsby, his wealthy neighbor, Max Gerlach.
And here's where the legend of Gatsby just meets reality. Gerlach was a fascinating figure. A gentleman bootlegger, a former WWI major.
Who flaunted his nouveau riche status by throwing these unbelievably lavish parties. He never wore the same shirt twice and regularly used the phrase old sport to address everyone he met.
He was the guy.
He was the guy. He fostered myths about himself, that he was related to the German Kaiser. He was the embodiment of that mysterious self-made man who had achieved financial success but lacked the social history to back it up. He was the perfect template for J. Gatsby.
So in May 1924, Fitzgerald moves the family to the French Riviera to work on this new novel. He's determined to make it a conscious artistic achievement, deliberately shifting away from the autobiographical realism of his first two books.
But the personal chaos, it followed them. While they were abroad, a major marital crisis developed that caused a permanent, irreparable breach.
Zelda became infatuated with a French naval aviator, Edward Jazan, and she asked for a divorce.
And Fitzgerald, in this desperate, panicked reaction, he locked her in the house.
Wow.
Jazan left, apparently having had no intention of marrying Zelda, but the humiliation and the breach of trust were permanent. Zelda then overdosed on sleeping pills. They eventually smoothed it over publicly, but they never truly discussed it. They just let the damage fester.
And The Great Gatsby was published shortly after that on April 10th, 1925.
And despite being lauded by literary giants like T.S. Eliot, who praised its control and narrative mastery.
Eliot loved it, right? He called it a huge step forward.
A huge step, exactly. And Willa Cather, Edith Wharton, they all saw it as a massive leap forward. But commercially,
It was a total flop.
a complete dud. I mean, it sold fewer than 23,000 copies in the first year.
That's nothing compared to his other books.
Nothing. And get this, his domestic royalties in 1929, so 4 years later, amounted to, what was it, $5.10.
Wow. Just wow. $5. So you realize the man who wrote the great American novel made less than $6 from it 4 years after it came out. That financial anxiety must have just been a constant suffocating cloud over his art.
hmm The time in France also coincided with the rise of the lost generation. Fitzgerald befriended the American expatriate community in Paris, including Gertrude Stein, James Joyce, and most importantly, Ernest Hemingway.
He really admired Hemingway, saw him as a kind of literary conscience.
He did, but their friendship is one of the most fraught in literary history. Constantly strained, often poisonous, and largely because of Zelda.
The infamous Hemingway-Zelda conflict.
Right. Hemingway outright disliked Zelda. He called her insane and an evil shadow in his memoir, A Movable Feast.
And he believed she was the one corrupting Scott's talent.
He fundamentally believed that. He argued she pressured Scott to write the lucrative short stories instead of focusing on novels just to maintain their extravagant lifestyle. This necessity, Hemingway argued, was whoring his talent.
And Zelda didn't help her own case, did she? She confirmed her commercial preference, saying she always felt a story in the Saturday Evening Post was tops.
Because of the high pay and the wide readership, it was a cultural divide. The perceived purity of the novel versus the lucrative commercialism of the mass-market short story.
And the conflict got intensely personal and cruel.
Very cruel. Hemingway detailed how Zelda used homophobic slurs, accusing Fitzgerald of having a homosexual relationship with him, a claim Fitzgerald denied, but which clearly shook him.
It raises this important question about his dynamic. If he was so desperate for external validation from Ginevra, from Zelda, from Hemingway, that he felt he needed to prove his masculinity.
Right. He even had sex with a prostitute to prove his heterosexuality. But Zelda found the condoms beforehand, which just sparked another bitter, jealous quarrel.
The sheer drama surrounding them was constant. It was almost designed for public consumption, but so deeply destructive privately.
The incident where Zelda threw herself down a flight of marble stairs because Fitzgerald was engrossed in a conversation with Isadora Duncan and ignored her. It's just a perfect illustration of her escalating, desperate attempts to control all the attention.
The return to America didn't stabilize anything. Their marriage was a wreck. The need for money was ever more pressing, and it forced him into a truly unhappy professional detour. Hollywood.
In 1927, he accepts a screenwriting invitation, a massive financial commitment that he needed to pay off debts, but the novelty faded fast.
They were known for these wild, juvenile pranks.
Like boiling expensive watches in a pot of tomato sauce, which just outraged their new, staid Hollywood acquaintances.
And Fitzgerald, desperately seeking some kind of intellectual connection, found a new muse in the 17-year-old starlet Lois Moran.
He was captivated by her youth and her admiration for him. She inspired the character Rosemary Hoyt in Tender is the Night, the beautiful, fresh young actress.
He also wrote her into the short story Magnetism. This pattern of finding muses and immediately mining their lives for fiction was just a constant in his career.
And naturally, Zelda's jealousy manifested violently. She set fire to her own expensive clothes in a bathtub as a self-destructive act, and she disparaged Moran as a breakfast food.
After only 2 months in Hollywood, the unhappy couple left.
And this period really marks the start of the final devastating descent, primarily because of Zelda's escalating mental health crisis. By 1930, her behavior became truly violent and erratic.
The incident along the Grand Corniche in France, that's just terrifying.
Where she seized the car's steering wheel in an attempt to drive herself, Scott, and their daughter over a cliff. That was the ultimate sign of collapse.
It's absolutely horrifying, scene of domestic terror that must have haunted him. And following this, in June 1930, doctors finally diagnosed her with schizophrenia.
She spent the rest of her life in and out of expensive psychiatric treatment, first in Switzerland and later at the Phipps Clinic at Johns Hopkins.
H.L. Mencken noted privately that Zelda was only half sane. He expressed deep regret that Fitzgerald couldn't focus on writing great novels because he was forced to churn out magazine stories just to pay for her extremely expensive psychiatric care.
It truly highlights the terrible cost of that required affluent lifestyle.
And here's where the literary theft and conflict really peaked. Fitzgerald was working on his 4th novel, which drew heavily on the disintegration of their marriage.
The story of a promising young man marrying a mentally ill woman, the very material of their lives.
And Zelda preempted him.
She did. While she was hospitalized, she wrote and sent her own fictionalized account, Save Me the Waltz, to Scribner's.
Fitzgerald was furious. he saw as a theft of his novel's plot material. He privately called her a plagiarist and a third-rate writer. It wasn't just personal, it was professional. She had staked a claim on his artistic material.
Yet despite his anger, he persuaded Maxwell Perkins to publish her novel. It failed, both commercially and critically.
And Fitzgerald's own work, Tender is the Night, finally came out in 1934, a 9-year gap from Gatsby.
It received mixed reviews, partly because its complex structure confused critics, but primarily because Depression-era audiences just saw Fitzgerald as an irrelevant symbol of jazz-age excess.
And this brings us squarely into the Great Depression and the cruel reality of his financial decline. His glamorous material was suddenly completely out of step with the national mood.
As one journalist noted, Americans could no longer afford champagne or trips to Montparnasse. Fitzgerald's works were deemed elitist and materialistic, and his popularity just plummeted.
The financial situation was dire and humiliating. By 1936, his book royalties amounted to a pitiful $80.
$80 for the year. He was in constant crushing debt, relying on loans from his agent, Harold Ober, and his editor, Perkins, just to keep Zelda institutionalized and his daughter in school.
He eventually severed ties with Ober, his most loyal agent, purely out of shame. He believed the agent had lost faith in him because of his deepening alcoholism and unreliability.
And his health was crumbling, too. The heavy drinking led to serious physical ailments: cardiomyopathy, coronary artery disease, recurring tuberculosis. Between 1933 and 1937, he was hospitalized 8 times for alcoholism alone.
The public low point came in September 1936. A journalist, Michel Mock, publicly reported on Fitzgerald's alcoholism and career failure in a nationally syndicated article.
And that piece, exposing his private struggle to the nation, it so deeply damaged Fitzgerald's reputation that it prompted him to attempt suicide after reading it. He later referred to this whole period of decline in his short story, The Crack-Up.
The necessity to pay for Zelda's confinement drove the final Hollywood act. In 1937, he accepted a lucrative MGM contract, nearly $30,000 a year, his highest salary ever.
But the bulk of it was immediately consumed by Zelda's medical bills and Scotty's school expenses. It was the salary of a major success paying for the fallout of a major failure.
This period offered a brief, sad attempt to reclaim the past. In 1938, he reunited with Ginevra King, the original muse.
He was hoping to keep the illusion perfect, as he told his daughter. But his uncontrollable alcoholism ruined the meeting, and a disappointed Ginevra returned to Chicago. The past could not be resurrected.
His final companion was the gossip columnist Sheila Graham. And there's this truly depressing moment when he tried to buy her a set of his novels as a gift.
Only to realize that bookstores had stopped carrying his works. That moment, the realization that he was largely forgotten as an author, must have been utterly demoralizing.
His screenwriting output was minimal, often uncredited. He only got sole credit for 3 Comrades in 1938, despite doing dialogue polish for huge projects like Gone with the Wind.
Which he disparaged as an old wives' tale.
Of course he did.
Director Billy Wilder famously summarized Fitzgerald's Hollywood foray. He said it was like a great sculptor who was hired to do a plumbing job. His talent was being wasted, and he knew it. He mocked himself in the Pat Hobby stories, writing about the miserable life of a Hollywood hack who couldn't keep a job.
And yet he used his spare time, despite his failing health, to work on his final unfinished novel, The Last Tycoon, based on the film executive Irving Thalberg.
And in a moment of profound reflection, nearing the end, he wrote this regretful letter to his daughter about his one great triumph.
I wish now I'd never relaxed or looked back, but said at the end of The Great Gatsby, I found my line, from now on this comes first. This is my immediate duty. Without this, I am nothing.
That quote, that focus on duty to art over duty to lifestyle, it forces us to turn our attention from the tragedy of the man to the triumph of his artistry.
Right. Let's look closely at the literary evolution of his novels versus the commercial demands of his short stories, because that is the heart of his crack-up.
We see a clear, discernible progression in his novels. His authorial voice clearly matured with each successive work, despite all the external chaos.
This Side of Paradise, while a sensation, was criticized by his friend Edmund Wilson for its poor form and construction, its reliance on textual fragments, letters, poetry. It was experimental, but kind of a mess.
And Fitzgerald was acutely sensitive to that kind of criticism. He read those reviews, and Beautiful and Damned was a direct attempt to improve. It showed superior form and construction, and a move toward an ironical, pessimistic style. He was consciously learning the craft.
But The Great Gatsby was the masterpiece precisely because it was a conscious artistic pivot. He intentionally departed from the sprawling realism of his first two novels to create a pure, controlled, creative work.
He refined his prose. He consciously emulated the literary styles of Joseph Conrad and, notably, Willa Cather. Her novel, A Lost Lady, influenced him greatly.
Because it also features a wealthy married socialite who kind of symbolizes the decay of the American dream.
Exactly. He was moving away from biography and toward myth.
And the literary world, they recognized it. With Gatsby, critics acknowledged he had upgraded from being a brilliant improvisateur to a conscientious and painstaking artist. He was deliberately using symbolic language and setting the green light, the Valley of Ashes, to communicate these really deep themes.
Gertrude Stein, a notoriously tough critic, she argued that Fitzgerald had surpassed his contemporaries, including Hemingway.
Really?
Yes, due to his masterful ability to write in natural sentences. She called him a genius who would be read when many of his well-known contemporaries are forgotten.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast with his short fiction. His novels showed this artistic progression. His 164 short stories, overall, showed the opposite.
And again, the reason is simple and heartbreaking. Money. Money was the primary impetus. He lamented, I have to write a lot of rotten stuff that bores me and makes me depressed.
He actively tailored them to commercial tastes, often rewriting stories to add these forced happy plot twists.
The saccharine denouement that the editors of slick magazines demanded.
And he was rewarded handsomely for this self-betrayal, which is why he kept doing it. He was earning up to $4,000 per story at his peak.
The equivalent of a major annual salary today. Just for churning out 15 to 20 stories a year for the Saturday Evening Post. This gave him the high life, but it just drained his artistic energy.
It created what his friend John Dos Passos called literary schizophrenia.
The daily battle of deciding whether to do good writing that satisfies the conscience or cheap writing that satisfies the pocketbook. He debased his undeniable gift by transforming these complex tales into social romances with inevitably happy endings for the commercial market.
Okay, so let's look at the enduring thematic power that transcends the quality gap between the two forms. First, the generational zeitgeist.
Right. Fitzgerald was the foremost chronicler of the Jazz Age. He defined a generation who were adolescents during World War I, largely untouched by its horrors and dedicated to the fear of poverty and the worship of success.
And as Stein suggested, his fiction didn't just record this generation, it kind of created it in the public's mind, giving them a self-consciousness.
He became the standard bearer for youth in revolt. He ridiculed critics who denounced his use of modern alien slang and his depictions of premarital sex, arguing they wanted to retain outdated ideas about society that just didn't exist anymore.
What's so critical and so deeply relevant for you today is his continuous, deep-seated preoccupation with wealth, class, and the American dream.
This theme is just deeply rooted in his lifelong status as a poor boy in a rich town, a poor boy in a rich boy's school, a poor boy in a rich man's club at Princeton.
He harbored, and this is his phrase, the smoldering resentment of a peasant towards the wealthy, and he channeled that right into his art.
His work satirized the leisure class, people who take all of the privileges of the European ruling class and assume none of its responsibilities.
Even H.L. Mencken, who criticized him for focusing too much on the wealthy, admitted that he came the closest to capturing their idiotic pursuit of sensation, their almost incredible stupidity and triviality, their glittering swinishness.
He nailed it.
And The Great Gatsby specifically, it dissects the entrenched class disparities, and it provides this stunning critique of the American class system. It argues for the limits of the lower class to transcend their birth status.
Right. Even if poorer Americans become rich, the nouveau riche, like Gatsby, they remain inferior to those with old money, like the Buchanans.
Gatsby's immense wealth couldn't buy him the social history of the Buchanans. That sense of eternal, unbridgeable distance, that no matter what you achieve, there's always an inherent club you can't join, that is the ultimate American story.
That kind of social anxiety and status conflict is just as relevant now as it was then.
And this ties directly into the theme of otherness and appropriation. Fitzgerald constantly felt like a societal outsider, a parvenu, and he used that feeling to fuel his writing.
And this sense of otherness defines his greatest character. J. Gatsby is fundamentally defined by his otherness and his obscure origins.
Tom Buchanan belittles him as Mr. Nobody from Nowhere.
Exactly. His success is seen as a threat precisely because he is an outsider who lacks the coveted status of old-stock Americans. Scholars find the fiction so enduringly relevant today because it captures this perennial American experience of social anxiety, status conflict, and resentment towards outsiders, immigrants, the nouveau riche, successful minorities.
Before we wrap up the artistry section, we have to talk about his appropriative tendency. His habit of lifting material directly from the lives of others, something he did constantly, almost pathologically.
It was part of his process. He quoted verbatim entire letters from his mentor, Father Sigourney Fay, in This Side of Paradise.
For The Beautiful and Damned, he inserted actual sentences from Zelda's diary.
Which prompted her to jokingly note in a review that she recognized parts of her old diary that mysteriously disappeared after their marriage. He borrowed biographical incidents from his friend for the rich boy. He truly saw everything in his life and the lives of those around him as material for his craft.
And the most striking instance is with Ginevra King. She wrote him a story as a parting gift about being trapped in a loveless marriage but pining for a former lover who attained wealth.
And scholars note the plot similarities at the core of The Great Gatsby. He literally took the emotional narrative of his first great love and built his masterpiece around it, justifying it because, to him, it was his life, his experience to use.
So we have this flawed, contradictory man, a plagiarist of his own life and others, who died on December 21st, 1940, at age 44, believing his life and work were total failures.
He died of a heart attack due to occlusive coronary arteriosclerosis.
And the immediate critical response was harsh and dismissive. They saw him as a failed alcoholic and a mere chronicler of the jazz age.
His New York Times obituary cemented his work forever to an era when gin was the national drink and sex the national obsession.
And Dorothy Parker's famous line, uttered at his sparsely attended visitation, just encapsulated the tragedy. She murmured, "The poor son of a bitch."
A line taken directly from Alice's observation at Gatsby's own sparsely attended funeral in the novel. The fiction had become prophetic of the author's own fate.
Even in death, the complications continued. His lifelong status as an outsider. The Catholic Church initially denied burial in the family plot because he was a non-practicing Catholic,
forcing him to be buried in Rockville Cemetery until 1975, when his daughter successfully petitioned to have his remains and Zelda's moved to the Catholic St. Mary's Cemetery.
But the critical reevaluation started almost immediately, and it was largely driven by the loyalty of his friends.
Within 1 year, Edmund Wilson published The Unfinished The Last Tycoon, and he included The Great Gatsby in the edition, which sparked new critical interest among scholars who saw the enduring quality of his best work.
And here's where it gets really interesting for the novel's legacy, World War II.
Right. Gatsby gained massive, unexpected popularity when 123,000 free Armed Services Edition copies were distributed to American soldiers overseas and to prisoners of war.
This introduced the novel to a massive, new, non-academic audience, men who were fighting for America, reading about its failed ideals.
That distribution was the catalyst. By 1960, the book was selling 100,000 copies per year. Today, it has sold millions, is required reading, and is hailed by some, like Charles Jackson, as the only flawless novel in American literature and the strong contender for the great American novel.
Fitzgerald became this cult figure by the 1950s, an Adonis of letters who was more widely known than he ever was during his lifetime.
Adam Gopnik asserted that Fitzgerald, contrary to his own famous lament that there are no second acts in American lives, became an enduring legend of the West. He found his second act posthumously.
His legacy is secured by his style, which influenced so many later writers like John O'Hara and Richard Yates, and his work has been adapted across every medium, 6 major film versions of Gatsby alone.
His life story is constantly being retold, from Beloved Infidel to Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the arc of his life, the glittering youth who became the chronicler of the jazz age.
The tragic descent into alcoholism and financial ruin caused by the need to maintain a cripplingly expensive lifestyle.
And the final critical recognition that cemented his place in American letters. He was the perpetual outsider who wrote the quintessential story of what it means to be an American outsider.
And this returns us to that profound regret he voiced to his daughter near the end of his life. He wished he had prioritized the artist over the careerist.
That he should have finished Gatsby and declared, "I've found my line. From now on, this comes first. This is my immediate duty. Without this, I am nothing."
And this begs the essential provocative thought for you to consider. If Fitzgerald had successfully prioritized the artist over the careerist, could he have avoided the tragic decline that followed his greatest achievement?
Or was the tragedy The need for status, the pursuit of the unatonable Ginevra, and the demanding Zelda, the relentless consumption, was that inherent to the very material that fueled his greatest works in the first place?
If he had rejected the high life, would we even have The Great Gatsby? That's the question his legacy asks of all of us.